Okay, so we are talking about what the global community is doing, IPCC, Paris Agreement, nationally determined contributions. There is, of course, the industry trying to do something on its own. There are citizen groups that are trying to do some things on their own. There are youth movements like Greta Thunberg that you heard about. There are many youths coming up in US, in India, Africa. So this is at a level where the awareness is very high. So then you get into again behavioral science. There is a list of options for individuals, right? It comes down to the kind of food you eat. For example, meat is more energy intensive and environmentally worse than vegetarian food. Driving is bad, flying is bad, how much energy you use at home is bad, living in a big house is bad. So can you put up signs everywhere saying don't do this, don't do this, don't do this? Or do you have to provide solutions? So I believe that ultimately solutions have to come along that are as easy as an iPhone, that people rush to use the solutions which are very friendly, very make your life better in some way, etc., etc. But nonetheless, at present, we have some of the top options for reducing your carbon footprint. Okay, so can you live car free? It is possible in many places where the public transportation is good, but the system has to make sure that public transportation is good. This is not possible everywhere, and it also depends on whether it's accessible to all the economic strata in the community. So there is the equity problem there as well. Refurbishments, renovation of the house to retrofit for energy efficiency, storm windows, maybe solar heating, solar power, etc. You can use a battery electric car, but you can look up some of the articles I write. I've provided a link to my blog site on the YouTube channel, but it turns out there is good research that shows that there are two things. One, people who buy hybrid cars or electric cars often tend to drive just a little more because they think, well, I'm doing something good and my car is environmentally friendly, so there is a little bit of that. Plus, there is a one action bias, which means you buy a electric car and you think I've done my part, and then you don't pay attention to anything else. My good friend Gidon Eshel, now he's at Baird College, but he was at Chicago when he did this paper. He and his colleagues showed that a person who's driving an SUV, big car, and who is a vegetarian can actually have a smaller carbon footprint than a person who's driving a hybrid but getting a lot of the calories from fish and meat. What am I trying to say? Basically, you have to manage a few things together. You cannot just do one thing and say, I have done my part. That's very difficult as well. Vegan diet. So this is average reduction. So you can see living car-free will reduce it by more than two times carbon equivalent. Refurbishment, vegan diet, one less long-haul flight per year. Flight remains one of the most carbon intensive activities, but if you like travel, then what are you going to do about it? Plus, humanity has always depended on cultural exchanges, visiting places, learning about other cultures, having cultural exchanges, having awareness of other cultures, and traveling for work are a big part of life. So what are the options if you don't want to fly or if you cannot fly? That's something also that has to be kept in mind. But you can see heat pump, renewable energy, improved cooking equipment, renewable-based heating, public transportation. The list is very long, but you can find where your carbon. There are many apps online you can find which take your data about your lifestyle, your travel patterns, your car, your commuter miles, etc., and tell you what is your carbon footprint. Okay, so annual consumption per person globally average tons of CO2 equivalent. So average person annual consumption per person is a average, which is not very indicative in a place like India, for example. You have poor people which do not have this kind of carbon footprint. But forgetting those kinds of details for a minute, food has got about zero point 0.7 CO2 tons of carbon CO2 equivalent. We say CO2 equivalent because it's not direct CO2, but you can calculate the amount of energy that is consumed for producing the food you are eating, and it can be converted to how much CO2 emission it actually results in as an equivalent, right? Home 1.1, pretty big. Transportation depends on, again, whether you are driving lots of miles every day or you're doing public transportation, plus the others at 0.8. Okay, so as an environmentally aware person, you might think you are doing everything you can, or you may be very highly aware, but there is also something called a carbon trap. In other words, if you want to reduce your carbon footprint by making sure that your food is not traveling too much, for example, those are called food miles. Let's say you try to consume something that's produced locally. Is it possible? It can be if you're really constantly monitoring everything. But let's say you're a parent, you have a child to take care of, children's school, education, health, whatever else. You have so many things to juggle. How many things are you able to track? It's not easy. Things that are adapted by people have to be very easy to do. They can just happen as part of life. So if we expect people to make massive changes in their lifestyle to save the environment, we have to remember something called the limited resource, which is willpower. So everybody has a willpower, but it's a limited resource. You cannot do good things from morning to evening. You may wake up with a very good intention of saving the environment. By midday, you may lose track of things. So this is a carbon trap. The system is set up in a way that it doesn't make it easy for individuals to monitor everything. So the system itself has to slowly move towards a low carbon system and a decarbonization in the coming decades if we want to really meet the big goals that are required to be met to avoid dangerous anthropogenic intervention, DAI. This is a new terminology introduced by IPCC. Not always very well defined, but you can find out more about it. It's a little far from oceanography, so I'm not going to go too far into these ideas, but you can look them up. DAI, dangerous anthropogenic interference, whatever. So there are plans on tracking them, plans on reducing them, but there has to be systemic changes, policy changes, regulation changes, transportation changes, food production changes, energy production changes, water changes, health care changes, etc., etc. So if as an individual you feel guilty, then I would say don't feel guilty. Do your best and make sure that you are not being too indulgent in terms of your carbon footprint, but don't stress.